Welcome to part 2 of 2.1. My name is Gregory Carlson, and let's do the next example. It is find the midpoint and distance between -16, -7, and -1, -9. So really the only difficult part here is watching out for the negatives. So let's find the midpoint. To find the midpoint, we simply need to add the x parts together. So -16 plus -1 divide by 2. Add the y parts together. -7 plus -9 divided by 2. And that's pretty much it. So let's simplify that a little bit. -16 plus -1 is -17 over 2, comma, -7 plus -9 is -16 over 2. And you don't need to simplify this one if you don't want to, but you should simplify that one. So you can leave that as -17 over 2, comma, -16 divided by 2 is 8. So if you put this as your answer, I would accept it. If you wanted to, you could have made it that -8.5. So I would accept either one of these as your answer. However, you should definitely simplify the -16 divided by 2. Let's do the distance. I'm going to rewrite the formula. The distance formula is the square root of x2 minus x1 quantity squared plus y2 minus y1 quantity squared. And you can see it's really easy to mix up the pluses and minuses in this formula and this formula, especially when we have negative values here. So make sure you memorize that the midpoint formula is x plus x over 2, y plus y over 2, whereas the distance formula is set up kind of differently. So let's do it. I need to do x2, because remember here's x1, y1, and here's x2, y2. So let's do x2 minus x1, which will be -1 minus -16 plus y2 minus y1, which will be -9 minus -7. And notice I have two negative signs here because I'm doing minus a negative and minus a negative. So those two negative signs, I need them both, and they'll turn into pluses. So this simplifies to -1 plus 16 is 15 squared. -9 plus 7 is 2 squared. Or is -2 squared actually. So I happen to know that the square root of 15, that 15 times itself is 225, but if you're not sure about that, just check it on your calculator. 15 times 15 is 225, and so that's 225, and -2 squared is 4. So the distance is the square root of 229. And you should try to simplify that. Check to see if a square number will go into it. 4, 16, 64. None of them will, so there's your final answer. It's better to leave your answer like this. If you do a decimal, then you're only having an approximate answer. This is the exact answer. Alright, sometimes this is a little tricky if we have square roots in our values. So let me show you how to do that one. Let's find the midpoint. Again, just follow the formula. Here's x1, y1, x2, y2. So x1 plus x2 over 2, so 3 root 5, plus -√5 over 2 is the first part of our midpoint. And then the y part will be y1 plus y2. So that's 5 root 7 plus 2 root 7 divided by 2. So it's actually going to be not as bad as it looked in the beginning. Just x1 plus x2 over 2, y1 plus y2 over 2. 3 root 5 plus -√5, that's simply going to be 2 root 5. Because this is kind of like we're kind of adding like terms here. 3 root 5, take away a root 5 is 2 root 5 over 2. 5 plus 2, that's going to be 7. Root 7 divided by 2. And so that's pretty much the answer. We could simplify this a little bit because those 2's cancel. So the answer is the square root of 5, 7 root 7 over 2. So that's right here is the midpoint between these 2 points. Notice this is okay simplify-wise because the square root is in the numerator. All right, the distance formula is going to be a little bit trickier. So let's take a look at that. All right, so the distance formula is we're going to do x2 minus x1. So let's do that. Negative root 5 minus 3 root 5. And all of that is going to be squared. So it says that's a little hard to read, I apologize. Negative root 5 minus 3 root 5, quantity squared, plus, and now we do y2 minus y1, 2 root 7 minus 5 root 7. Quantity squared. All of that is inside of our square root. So let's do it. Negative 5 take away negative 3 root 5. Well, negative 1 take away 3 is negative 4. So that's going to be negative 4 root 5. Quantity squared. So negative 1 minus 3 is negative 4. Plus 2 root 7 minus 5 root 7 is just going to be negative 3 root 7. Quantity squared. So that first step is just basically adding like terms. Notice that when we square these, we're always going to get positive numbers, so that's nice. So how do you square this? How do you square 4 root 5? You can just apply the square to both pieces. So 4 squared, can you see that? 4 squared is 16. And we learned earlier that the square root of 5 times the square root of 5 is 5. So if I have 4 root 5 quantity squared, the negative becomes a positive. 4 squared becomes 16, and root 5 squared becomes just 5, because square root of 5 times square root of 5 is 5. Same thing here, negative 3 squared, root 7 squared, well, negative 3 becomes 9. Root 7 times root 7 is 7. So we have 16 times 5 plus 9 times 7. So let's simplify that a little bit. 16 times 5 is, I believe it's 80. Yep, 16 times 5 is 80. 9 times 7 is 63. So we have 80 plus 63 for a final answer of the square root of 143. And there's no perfect square that goes into that, so that is our final answer. So if you want to, you can convert that to a decimal for an approximate answer. So the answer is approximately 11.958. But this is the perfect answer, the exact answer, the square root of 143. In part 3, I'll show you some really quick application problems. Again, notice that when you have a midpoint formula problem, your answer should be a point. So parenthesis, number, comma, number, parenthesis. When we're doing the distance formula, we should just get a number for the distance. So I'll see you in part 3 for some quick application problems.